The snow fell hard that night, swallowing every sound in the small Montana town of Copper Ridge. The wind howled like a living thing, pushing against the few who dared to walk its streets. Among them was Lavinia Brennan, a thin woman wrapped in a torn wool shawl, clutching her 5-year-old daughter close. Ellie's small face burned with fever, her breath shallow and weak. Each step Lavinia took felt heavier than the last. She could barely see through the storm, but she knew she had to keep moving. Somewhere in this town, someone would open their door. She stopped at the first house, the church rectory. The windows glowed with light, and for a moment hope stirred. She knocked hard. Reverend Talbot cracked open the door, his face half hidden by the glow from inside. "Please," she begged. "My little girl, she's burning up. We just need a warm place until morning." The Reverend sighed, shaking his head. "The church shelter is full. Mrs. Whoever you are, try the mayor's home, perhaps." The door closed softly, leaving her in the biting wind once more. Lavinia staggered toward the mayor's mansion, its windows golden and bright, laughter spilling from inside. Her knuckles were numb when she pounded on the thick oak door. After a long pause, a butler answered. Mayor Hutchins appeared behind him, wine glass in hand. "I'm sorry to trouble you," Lavinia whispered. "We've been walking since morning. My daughter's sick. Please, just a corner by the fire." The mayor's smile tightened. "We don't harbor drifters, madam. This is a respectable home." Before she could speak again, the door shut with a click. Tears froze on her lashes as she stumbled toward the doctor's office. The sign read closed. She beat on the door anyway. Nothing. The town hotel stood across the street, its lamps still burning. She crossed over, almost falling, and pushed through the door. The hotel keeper looked up from his ledger. "No credit accepted," he said before she could open her mouth. Lavinia's lips trembled. "Please, she's only a child." "Then take her to the church," he said without looking up. One by one, every door closed on her. Every window turned dark as she passed. The cold crept into her bones. Ellie whimpered softly against her shoulder. "It's okay, baby," Lavinia whispered. "Mama's got you. Just a little farther." But even she didn't believe her own words. Through the thick curtain of snow, a single light flickered high on the hill, a lantern glowing in the night. The Mackenzie estate. People in town whispered about the man who lived there, James Mackenzie, the richest cattle baron in 3 counties. A widower. Cold, hard, dangerous. But to Lavinia, that light meant hope. She took a shaky breath and began to climb. The path wound upward, each step sinking deep into snow. The wind bit her cheeks raw. Her legs trembled, but she kept Ellie pressed tight against her chest. When she finally reached the gate, her vision blurred. The lantern's glow swayed near the porch. She pushed open the iron gate and stumbled forward. Her hand slammed against the heavy door 3 times before her strength gave out. It opened slowly. A tall man stood there, dressed in a dark vest and crisp shirt, a lantern in one hand. His face was strong, lined with quiet grief. "Please," Lavinia gasped. "My daughter, she's dying. Just until morning." James Mackenzie looked down, the light from his lantern falling across Ellie's pale, sweating face. "How long has she been sick?" 2 days, Lavinia whispered. No one in town would help. James didn't speak another word. He stepped aside and said firmly, "Inside." Now, the warmth hit her like a wave as she crossed the threshold. The house smelled of wood smoke and pine oil. It was grand, tall ceilings, heavy rugs, paintings on the walls, but eerily empty. A woman hurried from the hallway, her gray hair tied neatly in a bun. "Mrs. Chun," James said quickly. "Hot water, clean linens, and willow bark tea." "Thomas, where's Thomas?" A boy about 16 appeared from the stairwell. "Here, sir. Ride for Dr. Whitmore. Triple pay. If he refuses, tell him I'll foreclose his loan Monday." Thomas nodded and ran out into the storm. Lavinia sank into a chair, clutching Ellie. "I don't want charity," she said weakly. James's voice turned sharp. "It's not charity. It's decency, something this town forgot. As Mrs. Chan guided Lavena to a guest room, she noticed small details. Dust on the piano, a covered portrait above the fireplace, a child's toy horse tucked under a side table. A man who once had a family. A man who'd lost more than he cared to admit. When Dr. Whitmore finally arrived, his expression was tight with anger and fear. "You didn't tell me it was her," he muttered to James. The widow from the mine collapsed. "She's trouble." James's tone turned cold. "She's a mother with a sick child. Do your job." The doctor examined Ellie quickly. "Pneumonia. Advanced. She's critical." Lavena's face went white. "Please, doctor." He cut her off gently. "I'll do what I can. But if her fever doesn't break by dawn—" He didn't finish the sentence. Mrs. Chun brought hot compresses. James helped lift Ellie's small body onto the bed. Lavena knelt beside her, whispering prayers under her breath. Hours passed. The fire popped and hissed, the clock ticking on the mantel. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, 3 strangers fought to keep a little girl alive. James stood silently by the doorway, his lantern dim now, his eyes fixed on the child. He had seen death before, on the range, in his own home, but this felt different. This felt like a second chance he didn't deserve. When Ellie's small body suddenly jerked in a violent shiver, Lavena screamed. The doctor rushed forward, shouting for more water. "Fever spiking," he cried. "If it doesn't break soon, she won't last till morning." Lavena clutched her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Ellie, please, sweetheart, stay with me. Please." James took a step closer, his hands tightening around the lantern handle. For a long moment, the room held its breath. The blizzard howled outside, but no one moved. The doctor shook his head slowly. "If the fever doesn't break by dawn," he said softly, "prepare yourself, Mrs. Brennan." Lavena bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. James turned toward the window, the snow outside glowing faintly in the lantern's reflection. Something inside him stirred, something he'd buried with his own wife and daughter 2 years ago. He whispered to himself, almost a prayer, "Not again." The lantern's flame flickered, the light catching in his eyes. Somewhere deep in that stormbound house, a decision was made, one that would change all their lives by morning. The storm raged on through the night, hammering the windows of the Mackenzie estate as if the wind itself were testing their strength. Inside, the house was still except for the soft rasp of Ellie's breathing and the crackle of fire. Lavena sat by her daughter's bedside, eyes red and swollen, refusing to move even as exhaustion pulled at her. Across from her, James sat in silence, a shadow in the firelight, his face unreadable but his presence steady. Hours passed, each tick of the clock louder than the last. Lavena finally spoke, her voice raw. "Why are you helping us?" James didn't look up. "Does it matter?" he asked. "Men like you always want something," she murmured. His jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about men like me." "I know you own half this territory," she said bitterly. "And I know you fire the foreman whose negligence killed my husband." The words hung in the air like smoke. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'll check the fire," he said, leaving the room before she could see the flicker of guilt in his eyes. Mrs. Chan entered quietly with tea, her small steps soft on the carpet. She sat beside Lavena, her voice gentle. "You rest, Missy. I'll watch the child for a while." But Lavena only shook her head, eyes never leaving Ellie. Mrs. Chan sighed and said softly, "Mr. James lost his wife and little girl. Same sickness. Same time, Christmas Eve, 2 years ago. He not let child die again. Not if he can stop." Lavena looked up, startled, her tears falling freely now. Mrs. Chun pulled back the cloth covering the portrait above the mantel, revealing a woman with kind eyes and a laughing little girl. "Be good man," Mrs. Chun whispered, broken but good. Lavena's heart ached, not from pity, but from understanding. Hours later, James returned, stopping short when he saw Lavena staring at the portrait. I'm sorry, she said quickly, wiping her eyes. I didn't know about your family. It's not relevant, he replied flatly. It's everything, she countered softly. It's why you helped us. He met her eyes, steady and distant. I helped because it was right. Silence settled again, heavy but not hostile. Finally, he asked, Your husband? He was at the Copper Ridge mine collapse. She nodded. I read the report, James said quietly. The foreman ignored safety warnings. I dismissed him too late. Your husband shouldn't have died. Levena's breath caught. You blame yourself? Blame changes nothing, he said. But I won't compound the wrong by letting his child die. Their eyes locked, a fragile understanding forming between grief and guilt. As dawn crept through the frost-streaked windows, the faintest color touched Ellie's cheeks. Levena leaned forward, afraid to hope. Then, slowly the child stirred. Mama, she whispered weakly. Levena let out a cry of relief, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. James exhaled sharply, stepping back, his hands trembling. Mrs. Chun smiled through tears. Thomas burst in from the hallway, face flushed from the cold, and grinned when he saw Ellie awake. Levena turned toward James, gratitude shining through exhaustion. He only nodded once, his expression unreadable, before turning away. From the doorway, Levena saw him standing alone by the window, shoulders tense, head bowed. For a man who commanded so much, he suddenly looked small, haunted, even. Later, when the first light of Christmas morning filled the kitchen, Levena found James there, pouring coffee into a tin mug. The stage to Helena leaves Tuesday, he said without turning. I'll arrange tickets and funds. Her joy faltered. You're sending us away? You'll recover here first, he replied. Then you'll continue your journey. So that's it, she said, anger rising. You play God for one night, then dismiss us so you don't have to feel anything? His head lifted, eyes dark with conflict. But before he could respond, the sound of multiple carriages echoed from the road below. Thomas rushed in, breathless. Mr. Mackenzie, he said, the whole town is coming up the road. The crunch of wagon wheels and a murmur of voices carried through the frozen air as the townspeople made their way up the long drive toward the Mackenzie estate. The Christmas morning sun, weak and pale, broke over the hills, glinting off snow-covered fences and the angry faces of those who had once called James Mackenzie their benefactor. He stood on the wide porch, coat collar turned up, hands clasped behind his back, watching them come. Levena stood behind him, holding Ellie close, her stomach tightening with dread. The first to speak was Reverend Talbot, his voice stiff. Mr. Mackenzie, we heard you've taken in a woman of questionable repute. James's eyes were cold as he replied, a mother and her child, Reverend. Say what you came to say. Mayor Hutchins stepped forward, his fur collar brushing against his chin, his words sharp. It's improper, James. An unmarried woman living under your roof. It's not fitting for a man of your position. James's lip curled slightly. You mean the same position that lends your family their livelihood, Mayor? The same man you borrowed from to build your fine home. A ripple of discomfort ran through the crowd. Mrs. Garrison, the merchant's wife, lifted her chin. You always think your wealth makes you untouchable. But this woman, she's been begging all over town. You have no idea who she really is. Levena's voice rang out suddenly, steady despite her shaking hands. I asked for shelter for my dying child. Each of you turned me away. He didn't. The crowd shifted uneasily, eyes darting anywhere but at her face. The Reverend cleared his throat. The church has a relief fund. We would have taken her, Mr. Mackenzie. She belongs in proper hands. Proper hands? James said softly, dangerously. You mean the same ones that slammed their doors on her? The mayor bristled. There are rules to keep this town respectable. Respectable, James said. You watched a woman and her child freeze outside your warm houses and called it decency. His voice rose, low but cutting, echoing across the yard. I won't send her back into the cold so you can feel comfortable again. The mayor stepped forward, face red. You're a fool to defy us. People talk, James. They'll say she's your mistress. James's voice turned to steel. Let them. Lavena's heart thudded, but she lifted her chin, meeting the crowd's gaze. I am a widow, she said clearly. My husband died in the Copper Ridge mine collapse, the one owned by Mr. Mackenzie. I was traveling to my sister in Helena when the stage broke down. I asked for shelter, not pity. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Mrs. Garrison sneered. A respectable woman would have saved enough for a hotel. Lavena's anger flared. A respectable woman's husband would have been paid what he was owed instead of being left with nothing. That silenced them. Eyes turned toward the mayor. He shifted uncomfortably. You refused her death benefits? He asked James, his voice cautious now. James's stare was unflinching. My foreman refused them. He was dismissed. The case has been under review. Lavena turned to him sharply. Under review? Since when? 3 months ago, James said quietly. He didn't meet her eyes. The Reverend, pale and sweating, tried to regain control. Mr. Mackenzie, this arrangement, this woman, cast a shadow over your good name. James laughed without humor. My good name? Tell me, Reverend, what good is a name when it's spoken by cowards? The mayor stepped forward again. If you persist, the church and council will act. You could lose everything. James's expression didn't waver. I already did, he said softly. Then, louder, Mrs. Brennan and her daughter will stay until they're fit to travel. Anyone who spreads gossip will find their debts called in by morning. A murmur swept through the group. You can't threaten us, Mrs. Garrison snapped. James stepped down one stair, towering over them. Try me. His tone was quiet, lethal. The crowd broke apart, muttering, the mayor pulling his coat tighter. One by one, they turned back toward town, their pride wounded and their fear palpable. When the last wagon disappeared down the hill, silence fell again. Lavena turned to James, her voice soft but full of feeling. You didn't have to do that. He stared at the empty road. Yes, I did. They'll destroy you for this, she whispered. He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw the faintest trace of a smile. They already hate me. At least now it's for good reason. The snow had begun to fall again, light and steady. Lavena's breath came out in white puffs as she spoke. The death benefits, you meant it? They'll come through. James nodded. Every word. It's what's owed to you. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked quietly. Because I didn't want your gratitude, he said, meeting her gaze. I wanted to make it right. She took a hesitant step closer. James! But before she could finish, Thomas burst from the stables, face flushed. Mr. Mackenzie, the townsfolk, they blocked the road with wagons. They're stopping anyone from coming or going. James frowned. A blockade? Yes, sir. They're calling it a boycott. No merchant will sell to us. No blacksmith will shoe our horses. The mayors ordered it. Lavena's stomach dropped. Because of me. Because of their fear, James said grimly. They've always needed someone to blame. Lavena turned toward the valley, where faint columns of smoke marked the town below. You stood up for me, and now they'll starve you out. James's jaw set. Then we endure it. I won't throw you out into that snow. I can't let you lose everything, she said, her voice trembling. I've already lost everything, he replied quietly. The words hung in the frosty air between them, heavy with truth. Inside, Mrs. Chun and Thomas waited anxiously. They've stopped the supply wagons, Thomas said. We've got enough food for 2 weeks, maybe less. Then we ration, James said. We'll manage. Lavena looked at him, seeing the same unyielding strength that once made him the most powerful man in the valley, but now tempered by compassion. Yet as night fell again and the lanterns burned low, she couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at her heart. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, she stood by the window watching snow drift down over the darkened stables. You didn't have to fight for me, she whispered to herself. Behind her, James's voice broke the silence. Maybe I was fighting for myself. She turned. Startled, he stood in the doorway, his face half in shadow. "You reminded me," he said quietly, "what it means to care about something again." Lavena's eyes filled with tears, but before she could speak, a sound echoed faintly from the valley. The sharp crack of gunfire or wood splitting, she couldn't tell. James turned toward the sound, tense. "They won't stop," he murmured. "Not until they break us or we break them." Lavena stepped forward, her voice firm now. "Then let's make sure it's the latter." For a long moment, they stood facing each other, two weary souls caught in a storm not made of snow, but of pride and defiance. Outside, the wind howled against the windows once more, as if warning them of the battles yet to come. The days that followed were thick with silence, the kind that seeps into the bones and steals sleep. The townspeople's blockade turned the Mackenzie Ranch into an island of snow and isolation. No merchant dared bring supplies. No letters came through, no news but what Thomas overheard on his rides near the ridge. Rumors spread like wildfire, claims that James had taken Lavena as his mistress, that Ellie was his illegitimate child, that he'd gone mad and locked them away. Copper Ridge had always whispered about James Mackenzie, but now their gossip had teeth. Lavena saw the toll it took on him. Each morning he walked the grounds, jaw clenched, staring toward town as if he could will the people back to decency. She wanted to tell him she was sorry, that she should leave, but every time she tried, he'd look at her with that steady, calm gaze that stopped the words in her throat. Still, one bitter night, when the wind was sharp enough to cut, she made her decision. She packed quietly, her hands shaking as she folded Ellie's small clothes into a sack. The fire was dying low when Ellie stirred. "Mama," she mumbled, half asleep. "Why are you packing?" Lavena froze. "Because we're leaving in the morning, sweetheart." Ellie sat up, her hair wild, eyes wide. "But I like it here. Thomas says I can help him brush the horses when I get better. And Mr. James, he's nice, Mama." Lavena's throat tightened. "I know, baby. But sometimes staying hurts the people we care about." Ellie's voice was soft. "Do you care about it?" Lavena paused. "Yes," she whispered. "That's why we have to go." Mrs. Chun appeared in the doorway, her night robe fluttering slightly in the draft. "Running not always answer," she said quietly. Lavena blinked back tears. "I'm not running. I'm protecting him." Mrs. Chun stepped closer, her eyes kind but firm. "Protecting from what? Town already hate him. But you leaving? That will kill him faster than fire." Lavena turned away, voice cracking. "You don't understand. They're boycotting him because of me. His name, his business, his home, it's all being destroyed." "He not care about those things," Mrs. Chin said. "He care about you, about little one. Before he come, he dead inside." Now he breathed again. Lavena didn't answer. She just stood there, listening to the howl of the storm outside, wishing it would quiet the storm inside her chest. Later that night, as she tied the last of the bags, the kitchen door creaked. James stood in the doorway, his eyes shadowed but clear. "You're leaving," he said, his voice flat. Lavena froze. "I have to," she whispered. "Look what I've done to your life." He took a step forward. "You've brought it back to life." She shook her head. "They're destroying you, James. They've turned the whole town against you." "I don't care about the town." "You should," she said fiercely. "This ranch, this land, it's your legacy." He stopped, his voice rising suddenly, sharp and raw. "My family is dead, Lavena. My legacy died with them." The words hit the air like gunfire. Silence followed, heavy and cold. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "They've been gone for 2 years. I've been walking, working, breathing, but not living. Then you came. You and that little girl reminded me what it feels like to want tomorrow to come." A young farmer named Samuel offered to help mend the fences. "You helped me last spring when the drought hit," he told James. "Guess it's my turn." Even Dr. Whitmore, once too cowardly to stand up to the town, arrived one afternoon. "I came to apologize," he said stiffly, removing his hat. "I was wrong. I let fear make me small. If you'll have me, I'd like to help however I can." James looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Help with the new barn. No pay." The doctor grinned faintly. "Fair enough." Slowly, a handful of townspeople began to drift back into the Mackenzie circle, but the mayor and Reverend Talbot still held power and bitterness. Their blockade remained, and though supplies trickled through, the threat of ruin still hung heavy over the ranch. Through it all, James and Lavena grew closer. There was laughter again in the house, soft, hesitant, but real. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her as she worked, his eyes warm in a way that made her chest ache. One evening, after the barn frame was nearly complete, they stood together on the porch watching the stars. The cold air was sharp, the snow crunching softly beneath their boots. "When this is over," James said quietly, "when things settle, would you consider staying?" Lavena turned, heart pounding. "As what? A guest? An employee?" He swallowed hard. "As my wife, if you'll have me." Her breath caught. "Are you asking?" His lips twitched. "Not yet. Not properly. Not while we're still fighting for this place. But I wanted you to know, when the time comes, I will." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "Then I'll wait for you to ask properly." For a moment, they just looked at each other, and then he leaned in and kissed her, gentle, certain, full of promise. Inside, Mrs. Chun peeked from the kitchen window, smiling knowingly. Ellie tugged at her sleeve. "Does this mean Mr. James will be my papa?" Mrs. Chun chuckled softly. "I think so, little one. I think so." But peace never lasts long in a town ruled by fear. The very next morning, a courier arrived from Copper Ridge, his face pale and nervous. He handed James a stack of papers, stamped with the seal of the mayor's office. "It's a lawsuit," the courier mumbled, "filed by Mayor Hutchins himself." James read silently, his jaw tightening. "For what?" Lavena asked, dread creeping up her spine. "Breach of moral conduct," James said flatly. "They're claiming that by housing an unmarried woman, I've violated community standards. They're calling for my water rights to be revoked." "They can't do that," Lavena gasped. "Oh, they can," James replied grimly. "Without those rights, the cattle die. The ranch dies with them." The hearing was set for 1 week. That night, the air around the dinner table was heavy with fear. "They're not just trying to ruin me," James said. "They're trying to erase everything I've built." Lavena reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Then we fight. Legally. If they want a battle, they'll get one." He gave a short laugh, humorless and tired. "The judge is the mayor's brother-in-law. We don't stand a chance." Thomas, who had been quiet all evening, finally spoke. "Maybe we do. My cousin works at the mayor's office. She hears things. If anyone knows what they're planning, she does." James looked at him sharply. "You'd risk that?" Thomas nodded. "After what they did, I'd risk more than that." 2 days later, under cover of darkness, Thomas rode out toward Copper Ridge. The storm clouds gathered above as he disappeared down the trail. Lavena spent that night pacing by the window, praying he'd make it back safely. When dawn came and the first rays of light touched the snow, the sound of hooves echoed from the road. Thomas stumbled into the courtyard, his coat soaked through, clutching a bundle of papers. "You need to see this," he gasped, limping from exhaustion. James tore open the bundle and spread the documents across the kitchen table. They were minutes from a town council meeting, stamped and signed. The words were clear: plans to cut off Mackenzie's resources, to force his compliance, and even a line about driving out the widow and her child. But at the bottom, there was another document, older, yellowed. Thomas pointed to it with a trembling hand. "This one, this is the worst of it." Lavena leaned in. It was the original death benefit claim from the Copper Ridge Mining Company, her husband's compensation for his death. Her heart stopped as she saw the foreman's signature approving the payment, dated 8 months earlier. The problem wasn't delay, it was theft. The money had been intercepted by the town's own bank, under the authority of one man, Mayor Hutchins. His signature gleamed beside the words "payment held for verification." Levaina's hands shook as she whispered, "He stole my money." James's eyes burned with fury. He's been embezzling funds. That's why he's desperate to ruin us, because you're living proof of what he did. Thomas added, "There's more. He's been skimming off the town's relief fund, too. My cousin heard him bragging about it." Levana looked at James, determination lighting her face. "We can destroy him with this." James nodded slowly. "If we can make it to the hearing. They'll try to stop us before we do." Outside, thunder rumbled low across the mountains. Mrs. Chun crossed herself. "Another storm coming," she murmured. James gathered the papers, his expression carved in stone. "Then we leave at dawn, before the town knows we have them." Levana stepped beside him, her hand finding his. "We'll face them together," she said. He looked at her, eyes softening for just a moment. "Together," he repeated. That night, no one slept. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters like the heartbeat of something restless and waiting. Inside, the small household packed what they would need: food, blankets, the documents that could change everything. Ellie watched from the stairs, clutching her doll. "Mama," she whispered, "is it another bad storm?" Levana knelt beside her and kissed her forehead. "It's just a storm, sweetheart, and it will pass." But as lightning flashed outside and snow began to fall again, Levana wasn't sure she believed it. Upstairs, James stood by the window, staring into the darkness. He could see the faint lights of Copper Ridge far away, warm, bright, and corrupt to the core. "They think they can take everything," he murmured. "Tomorrow, they learn what I've got left to lose." And below him, Levana whispered the same prayer she had made that first night. "Please, let's make it to morning." The storm came hard and fast at dawn, swallowing the valley in a swirl of white. The wind clawed at the shutters, and snow whipped through the air in icy sheets. But James Mackenzie had already hitched the wagon before the first light broke. Levana stood beside him, pulling on her gloves, the bundle of documents clutched tight in her coat. Behind them, Mrs. Chun helped Thomas into the wagon, his ankles still stiff from the fall he'd taken days earlier, but his jaw set in determination. Ellie, wrapped in a thick shawl, stood on the porch steps beside Mrs. Patterson, who had arrived before dawn to take her in. The little girl's eyes were wide, frightened but brave. "Mama, do you have to go?" she asked, voice small over the howl of wind. Levana crouched down, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's cheek. "Just for a little while, sweetheart. I have something important to do." "Will Mr. James go too?" Ellie asked. "Yes," Levana said, forcing a smile. "He'll be with me every step." Ellie nodded solemnly and pressed her doll into her mother's hand. "For luck," she whispered. Levana tucked it in her pocket, then kissed her forehead. "Be good for Mrs. Patterson." "I will." James met Levana's eyes over the wagon rails, his expression soft but firm. "We'll be back before sunset." "You better," Mrs. Patterson said fiercely, her gray hair whipping in the wind. "And you make that bastard pay for what he's done." James gave her a quick nod, then flicked the reins. The horses lurched forward, hooves kicking up snow. Behind them, the ranch faded into a blur of white. The road was nearly invisible, just faint ruts half buried by drifts, and twice Thomas had to climb down and lead them around fallen branches. Then, halfway down the ridge, they hit their first obstacle, a tree that had been deliberately felled across the road. "They know we're coming," Levana said, gripping the seat. James swore under his breath. "We'll take the old trail through Bear Hollow," he said. "It's rough, but it'll get us there." The trail was narrow, winding along the edge of a frozen creek, and snow weighed heavy on the pine branches overhead. Every few minutes, they heard hoofbeats echoing in the distance, someone following them. When they reached a sharp bend, Thomas twisted in his seat, eyes narrowing. "Riders," he said. "3 of them." James didn't turn around. "Hold on." He snapped the reins, urging the horses faster. The wagon jolted violently over rocks and ice, throwing snow into their faces. Levana clutched the seat, heart pounding. The riders were closer now, men from town, faces covered with scarves, rifles glinting. A shot rang out, hitting the side of the wagon and splintering wood. "James!" Lavena cried. "Keep your head down," he shouted, leaning low as another bullet whistled past. The horses screamed, panicked, but James kept control, his gloved hands steady on the reins. "They won't follow us through the ravine," he yelled. He turned sharply onto a narrow slope that cut through the woods. The wagon skidded, wheels biting into the frozen earth, but somehow held. When they reached the creek at the bottom, the riders stopped at the ridge above, unwilling to risk the drop. James slowed the team, breathing hard. "Everyone all right?" he called. "I think so," Lavena said, shaking. Thomas nodded, pale but unhurt. "We can't stop," she said. "If they go back to town, they'll warn the mayor." "Then we get there first," James said grimly, and cracked the reins again. The journey took 4 grueling hours. By the time they reached Copper Ridge, the storm had begun to break, the wind easing to a whisper, the clouds thinning to reveal a weak winter sun. The courthouse loomed at the center of town, white pillars, red brick, and a crowd already gathering. Word had spread. People lined the steps, muttering curious. James jumped down from the wagon, helping Lavena to the ground. "Stay close to me," he murmured. "Always," she said. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The mayor stood at the front beside his lawyer, smug and polished, his eyes flicking toward them with disdain. The judge, his brother-in-law, sat at the bench, bored and pompous. When the room quieted, the bailiff called out, "Case of Mayor Hutchins versus James Mackenzie, hearing on moral conduct and water rights." The mayor began his speech, smooth as oil. "Your Honor, for years Mr. Mackenzie has flaunted our town's values, but this latest transgression, housing an unmarried woman, parading her as his mistress, has crossed the line. His behavior endangers the moral fabric of Copper Ridge." The crowd murmured approvingly. Lavena's fists clenched at her sides. The mayor continued, "We therefore request the immediate revocation of his water rights, the imposition of a fine, and the removal of the widow Brennan from our township." The judge nodded. "Mr. Mackenzie, your response?" James stood, his broad shoulders straight, his voice calm but cutting. "My response is truth. I took in a dying child and her mother when every one of you turned them away." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "You talk about morality?" he said, voice rising. "Tell me, where was your morality when a woman begged for help and you locked her doors? Where was your decency when a child was dying in the snow?" The mayor's face flushed crimson. "You dare lecture us?" "I dare show you what real sin looks like," James said, reaching into his coat. He laid the bundle of papers on the table. "You accuse me of impropriety. I accuse you of theft, fraud, and conspiracy." The room erupted into whispers. The judge frowned. "You'll watch your tone, Mr. Mackenzie. You'll watch the evidence," James shot back. Lavena stepped forward, her voice steady. "These are minutes from the town council meeting. Proof that the mayor and his allies organized a boycott against Mr. Mackenzie's ranch. Here are signed records showing they discussed burning his barn." The crowd's whispers turned to gasps. "And this," she said, lifting the last document, "is the original death benefit claim for my husband's death. Approved, signed, and stolen. The signature holding the payment belongs to Mayor Hutchins." The mayor's eyes went wide. "That's a lie," he barked. Lavena's voice cut through the noise. "It's your seal, Mayor. Your hand stopped my payment. You let my child starve while you lined your pockets." The judge looked at the document, his face paling. "Mayor Hutchins, how do you explain this?" "Forgery," the mayor sputtered. "They've fabricated this to ruin me." "Enough," boomed another voice. Dr. Whitmore stood from the back row, his face drawn but resolute. "I'll testify. I heard the mayor discussing the boycott myself. He bragged about teaching Mackenzie a lesson." "Lies," the mayor shouted. But more voices rose. Mrs. Patterson, old Samuel, even the blacksmith. "He's been stealing from all of us," someone yelled. "Raised our taxes for his own gain." Took my farm after promising to extend my loan, another cried. The judge slammed his gavel. Order, he demanded, but the tide had turned. People were standing now, pointing, shouting. The mayor's composure cracked. You're all fools, he screamed. You be nothing without me. We're better without you, Lavena said quietly. The judge turned to the bailiff. Arrest him. What? The mayor bellowed. You can't. I can, the judge said coldly, and I will. I'll also be appointing an independent review of every financial record under your office. The bailiff grabbed the mayor's arm as he thrashed and cursed, his voice fading as he was dragged out. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos this time, but in applause. People clapped, some wept, others simply looked relieved, as though a great weight had lifted from their shoulders. Reverend Talbot stood near the back, his face pale. Mr. Mackenzie, he called. James turned. I owe you an apology, the Reverend said softly. We all do. James gave a curt nod. Then prove it. Be better than you were yesterday. When it was over, they stepped outside into blinding light. The storm had passed, the sky a clear winter blue. Snow sparkled like glass, and a faint rainbow arched above the courthouse roof. Lavena and James stood side by side, exhausted but free. It's over, she whispered. You're free now. You could go anywhere. So could you, he said. You'll get your money back, with interest. And if I don't want to go, she asked softly, if what I want is right here? He turned to her, the corners of his mouth lifting. Then you stay. Only if you ask properly this time. James's eyes softened. Then I will. He dropped to one knee right there in the muddy street, the crowd still buzzing behind them. From his pocket, he pulled out a simple gold ring, worn with age. It was my grandmother's, he said quietly. It's not fancy, but it's real, like what I feel for you. Lavena Brennan, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Ellie's mother, and the light that brought this house back to life? Tears filled her eyes as she laughed through them. Yes, she whispered, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he stood, she kissed him, the crowd cheering as if the whole town had been waiting for that moment. Even the judge, stepping out behind them, smiled faintly. Seems we've all been reminded what justice truly looks like, he said. Weeks later, spring came early to Copper Ridge. The barn was rebuilt, stronger, brighter. The fields thawed, and the valley filled with color again. James and Lavena were married under the open sky, the new barn their chapel. The ceremony was simple. White ribbons, a handful of wildflowers, and a modest crowd of those who had found their courage again. Ellie, wearing a crown of daisies, scattered petals down the aisle. Thomas, his ankle healed, walked Lavena to the altar. Mrs. Chun wept openly, clutching her apron. Dr. Whitmore, Mrs. Patterson, Samuel, and half the town stood to watch. The new reverend, younger and kinder, smiled as he began. Love is not charity, he said. It's mercy, the kind that opens doors when the world closes them. James and Lavena exchanged vows and voices that trembled but never faltered. I promise, James said, to never turn away someone in need, to choose love over bitterness, to be the man you and Ellie deserve. Lavena smiled through tears. I promise to stay, to fight beside you, to turn this house into a home. You may kiss your bride, the Reverend said. The crowd erupted as they kissed, laughter and applause echoing through the valley. Music began, fiddles, harmonicas, even drums borrowed from the local saloon. People danced in the yard, their joy contagious. Ellie spun with Thomas, giggling, while Mrs. Chun handed out slices of pie, muttering happily in Mandarin about family finally whole. As dusk fell, James and Lavena slipped away for a moment of quiet. They stood by the fence line, watching the lanterns flicker across the field. Any regrets? He asked softly. She leaned into him, smiling. Only that I didn't knock on your door sooner. He kissed her forehead. You knocked exactly when you were supposed to. Months turned into a year. Snow returned, softer this time, and the ranch thrived again. On Christmas Eve of 1892, the Mackenzie house glowed like a beacon in the storm. Inside, warmth and laughter filled every room. Lavena, now visibly pregnant, stirred soup on the stove while Mrs. Chan hummed beside her, hanging pine garlands. Ellie sat by the fire, reading aloud to Thomas, who listened with exaggerated seriousness. The smell of cinnamon and smoke wrapped the house in comfort. The door creaked open, and James stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat. "You're late," Lavena teased, turning to smile at him. "Had to check the fences before the storm hits," he said, then paused. "There's someone at the gate." "At this hour?" she asked. He nodded, expression thoughtful. "A woman. 2 children. They look desperate." Lavena's eyes softened. She set down her spoon, untied her apron, and grabbed her coat. "Then let's bring them in." James grinned, lighting the old lantern that had once saved her life. "I love you," he said quietly. She kissed his cheek. "I know. Now come on." Together, they stepped out into the snow, the light from the lantern casting a golden halo around them. The wind was cold, but it didn't feel cruel anymore. Ahead, through the swirling white, a figure waited, shivering, frightened, alone. As James and Lavena approached, the woman looked up, and the door of the Mackenzie house opened wide behind them, spilling light into the night. The last thing the storm saw before the world turned white again was that lantern held high, the flames steady, the promise of warmth unbroken. And from somewhere deep in the night came a whisper that carried through the snow, the same words that had once changed everything. "Stay the night. Stay forever."